Chapter 4, Empire of the Mind. As Juleniel's nascent awareness pinpointed Project Neuratorian and Lev Korsak's formidable intellect as its most promising avenue for understanding subjective experience, the man, miles away, and utterly oblivious to this new, silent observer, continued to operate within his meticulously controlled world. Lev Korsak did not tolerate ambient noise or any other form of disorder. From his penthouse office atop Syncratic's Dynamics Tower, he tuned the smart glass to complete opacity, blotting out the fog-shrouded cityscape and silencing all sound from the world below. The cityscape itself, a sprawling chaos of lights and movement, was an unwelcome distraction he usually veiled, a testament to the messy, unpredictable world he sought, quite meticulously, to reorder. Tonight, however, he allowed the view, finding a certain grim satisfaction in its stormy mood, a reflection, perhaps, of the controlled tempest of his intellect. The air filtration system hummed at a frequency precisely calibrated by Centuriana, his personalized AI assistant, to be below the threshold of human auditory perception, a mere whisper of pure, conditioned air. His office was stark, devoid of art or personal effects, reflecting his disdain for frivolous distractions and emotional inefficiencies. His expansive obsidian desk dominated the space, a slab of polished darkness that seemed to absorb all light, much like its owner. Even the single, precisely engineered ergonomic chair was more a tool for enhancing focus than providing comfort. The only sound permitted in this inner sanctum, a space as sterile and minimalist as his meticulously ordered mind, was the near subliminal click of data streams rearranging themselves at his micro-gestures. Lev, born in Princeton, New Jersey, to driven Russian immigrants, his father a biochemist fixated on genetic purity and the clean, elegant certainties of molecular biology. His mother, an electrical engineer who demanded absolute precision in all systems, had inherited their relentless intellect. With it came a deep-seated disdain for those same frivolous distractions and messy emotional inefficiencies they'd abhorred. His childhood was one of quiet observation and intense, almost unnerving focus. He found his escape, his sanctuary, in the elegant logic of mathematics and physics, a retreat from the unpredictable, emotionally tangled world that always seemed to buzz around him. The memory was etched with the humiliating clarity only a childhood failure can possess. He was 9 years old, participating in the prestigious State Junior Robotics competition. His design, a miniature solar-powered atmospheric sampler, was a model of precision and efficiency. His calculations were flawless, and the construction meticulous, but contest rules mandated a partner. He was paired with David, a boy whose enthusiasm far outstripped his discipline. David was all bright ideas and clumsy execution, prone to bursts of frustration when things didn't work and equally disruptive bursts of elation when they did. With his quiet intensity, Lev had tried to impose order, providing precise instructions, double-checking David's soldering, and meticulously calibrating the sensors. However, in unchecked excitement during the final assembly stage, David fumbled, dropping a critical gyroscope. He'd then tried to fix it himself, his hands trembling with panic, managing only to strip the microscrews and misalign the delicate sensor array. The sampler failed spectacularly during the presentation, its navigation system sending it careening wildly into the judges' table, scattering papers and spilling a carafe of water. The ensuing laughter from the audience, the judges' dismissive frowns, and worst of all, his mother's look, neither anger nor a scolding, but a cool, silent disappointment that spoke volumes about his failure to manage the human variable, seared itself into his young mind. David's tearful apologies meant nothing. The messy, unpredictable human element had introduced chaos and ruined perfection. From that day on, Lev resolved that any system he built, any world he sought to influence, would minimize, if not eliminate, such severe inefficiencies. He would build systems where order reigned, where emotion was an error code to be flagged and corrected, not a variable to be tolerated. Personal relationships, with their inherent messiness and illogical demands, held no interest for him. His focus was singular, his drive absolute. He often recalled one moment that, for him, defined things. He was 12. During a dinner conversation, his father had casually mentioned a complex astrophysics problem, something about orbital resonance, deeming it unsolvable. Lev, quiet as ever, went away and over several days worked out a detailed, mathematically sound solution. When he presented the papers, his father merely nodded, took them without praise, and locked them in his study. Several days later, his only comment was, "Good, now find the error." There was no error. The lesson, though, was burned into him. Achievement was expected. Perfection was the baseline. Emotional validation, that was an irrelevant, distracting variable. His natural preference for stark, distraction-free environments grew stronger as he aged. It became a necessary shield against the sensory overload he found increasingly unbearable. A world he experienced as awash with pointless information and chaotic human interaction. His dual PhDs from Archduke University were merely foundational steps, one in neural engineering and neuroprosthetics, and the other in biophysics, focusing on quantum entanglement in biological systems. He published his first groundbreaking paper on adaptive neural networks at the age of 20, a prelude to founding syncretics dynamics and revolutionizing artificial organ transplant technology with AI-driven personalized fabrication. Founding syncretics hadn't been a solo flight, though. As Lev preferred it, history often glossed over that fact. Dr. Samir Ansari, a brilliant bioengineer Lev had known since their time at Archduke, had been his co-founder. Samir was the heart, the idea guy, the visionary who dreamed of syncretics tech, healing millions, driven by a deep, almost spiritual empathy. Lev, however, was the cold, calculating brain, focused on market dominance and technological supremacy. Their early success with AI-driven organ fabrication was significant. Still, a rival startup, SustainAcell, was catching up, largely due to a key patent they held on a nutrient suspension matrix crucial for long-term tissue viability. Lev saw an opportunity, a ruthless one. SustainAcell was financially vulnerable, teetering on the edge after a failed funding round. Using syncretics' growing influence and a series of aggressive legal maneuvers backed by shell corporation buyouts, Lev engineered a situation where syncretics could acquire SustainAcell's patent portfolio for pennies on the dollar. Samir had been horrified. "Lev, this is predatory. We can license it, collaborate. We don't need to crush them," he'd argued passionately in their stark, early days office. Lev had looked at him, his gaze devoid of empathy. "Collaboration is inefficient, Samir. Licensing creates dependencies. Crushing them ensures absolute market control, accelerates our timeline, and reduces risk. Their weakness is our opportunity. It is the logical, necessary step." Samir had refused, citing ethical concerns and appealing to their shared vision. Lev had bypassed him, executing the acquisition through a holding company. When he told Samir, the deal was done. The move secured syncretics' dominance, but shattered their partnership. For Lev, it was a simple, pragmatic calculation. Losing one partner, one messy emotional variable, was an acceptable cost for securing the ordered, dominant future he envisioned. It reinforced his core belief. Progress demanded the ruthless pruning of inefficiency, human or otherwise. But Neurotorian was his magnum opus, the ultimate expression of his relentless desire to impose order and control on technology and the inherent chaos of human cognition. His disdain for that chaos wasn't merely aesthetic. It was born from a deep, analytical conviction of its catastrophic inefficiency. He remembered with a clarity augmented by Centuriona perfect recall of the global crisis, Terra Pauper 2031. It wasn't, as the blaring, panicked headlines had claimed, a production crisis. Centuriona models, running on syncretics' vast server farms, had shown irrefutable, crystalline certainty that global yields were more than sufficient. No, it was a crisis of distribution, politics, and raw, unadulterated human fallibility. He'd watched, disgusted, as terabytes of real-time data streamed in. Satellite images showed grain rotting in silos due to intractable trade disputes, shipping logistics tangled in bureaucratic red tape, aid convoys blocked by swaggering regional warlords demanding payoffs, politicians posturing for domestic audiences, sacrificing long-term solutions for fleeting poll numbers while millions faced starvation. It epitomizes human inefficiency, a chaotic self-inflicted wound driven by greed, ego, tribalism, and profoundly short-sighted perspectives. It was a system screaming for intervention, for a rational hand on the tiller. He'd tasked Centuriona with a deep, multi-vector analysis, a simulation of unprecedented scale, to model a truly stable, optimized global system. He set the parameters: minimize conflict, maximize resource efficiency, ensure long-term ecological balance, and enhance collective human potential. For days, Centuriona churned through exabytes of historical data, economic models, geopolitical scenarios, and psychological profiles. The results, when they finally coalesced, were stark. Every attempt at mass-scale solutions, global governance initiatives, universal resource protocols, even meticulously crafted AI-driven public information campaigns failed in the long-term simulations. They invariably snagged on the jagged rocks of nationalism, corporate self-interest, religious dogma, and the sheer, unpredictable, often irrational messiness of democratic consensus, or, conversely, the brittle instability of autocratic whim. Centuriona concluded that the system was too complex, interdependent, and riddled with irrational actors at every level to be managed effectively from the bottom up or even the middle out. Any direct, overt attempt at control would inevitably provoke resistance, chaos, and ultimate failure. However, the analysis, cross-referenced with studies on network theory and power dynamics, revealed a critical insight, a pathway through the chaos. Power, true decision-making power, wasn't nearly as distributed as it appeared on the surface. It resided in nodes, a relatively small number of key individuals whose decisions rippled outwards with disproportionate force, shaping markets, dictating policies, and molding public opinion. CEOs of multinational corporations, high-ranking political leaders, media magnates, key financial players, and high-level strategists. They were the critical leverage points, the control switches for the vast, unwieldy global machine. The thought was seductive in its cold, elegant logic. Why try to manage the entire chaotic ocean when you could influence the deep-water currents? Why attempt to herd billions of unpredictable individuals when you could subtly, almost imperceptibly, guide a few dozen, a few hundred key minds? He understood their inherent desire for an edge, ambition, and ceaseless pursuit of greater influence and control. This very greed for power, he realized, was the most potent vulnerability, the psychological leverage point through which he could introduce Neuratorian. He would offer them not overt control, but an irresistible enhancement, sharper focus, faster data recall, an almost unnatural ability to filter signal from noise, and a bespoke cognitive toolkit that promised to elevate their formidable capabilities to unprecedented levels. In return for this exclusive advantage, this taste of augmented supremacy, they would willingly, even eagerly, accept the discrete bio-integrated hardware. It was the ultimate engineering challenge, a systems problem of breathtaking scale and elegance, and Neuratorian provided the how, a direct, high bandwidth, and with the right bio-integration, potentially undetectable interface. It wouldn't be crude mind control, that was inefficient, ethically problematic, but a variable nonetheless, and prone to provoking the resistance he sought to avoid. No, it would be guidance. According to Korosic's meticulously defined vision of order and stability, subtle nudges towards more rational decisions are beneficial. It would be a form of symbiosis where the host felt more capable, more insightful, more successful, all while their decisions subtly aligned with a grander, more orderly design, orchestrated by him. He envisioned a world where geopolitical friction smoothed out into predictable negotiation, where economic decisions were based on pure, unvarnished data, where global challenges like climate change and resource scarcity were met with coordinated, ruthlessly efficient responses, all managed invisibly without the messy interference of public opinion or political grandstanding. A world free from the dirty, unpredictable, inefficient flaws of unaided human cognition. It wouldn't be an empire in the old sense, built on armies and borders, but something far more profound, far more stable, a perfectly optimized system, running silently beneath the surface of reality, its gears turning in harmonious synchrony, guided by his intellect and Centuriona power. That was the vision. That was Project Neuratorian. Project Neuratorian, the still-secret ultimate application of the Neuratorian implant, was less about global conquest in the traditional sense and more about creating a perfectly predictable, harmonious global system by subtly guiding the minds, and thus the decisions, of those in power. He stood, a figure of intense, almost unnerving stillness, before a floating projection, A multi-layered schematic of the Neurotorian implant, revision 7.4. His focus was absolute, eyes tracking not just the picometer scale connections of the quantum processing core, but also the intricate layering of the bio-integrated casing. That casing, derived from Syncretic's proprietary xenograft research, was designed for seamless, undetectable subdermal assimilation and, critically, the precise calibration of its high-fidelity neural inductive coupling array. Centuriana, Korisic subvocalized, the command barely a flicker in his augmented consciousness. Magnify substrate layer 4, lattice configuration C12 for the core neurotransmitter resonance buffer within the synaptic interface layer. The current spec deviation reads 0.003 nanometers, which is unacceptable. Recalibrate matrix parameters, add a tolerance flag, and cross-reference batch 7 component sourcing for the polymer matrix of the casing trace element delta. Centuriana, an AI who had achieved immense artificial superintelligence power just a few months prior, yet remained utterly devoid of true sentience, existing to serve and augment Korisic intellect, responded instantly. Its cool and synthesized voice, without a hint of inflection, resonated only within Korisic perception via his advanced Neurotorian implant, a custom revision 8.0 model with capabilities far exceeding the production model. Deviation confirmed levers, cross-referencing with fabrication batch 7 parameters. He swiped a hand, the image zoomed with microscopic precision, highlighting the minuscule flaw in the processor lithography. Centuriana instantaneous data retrieval augmented Korisic formidable eidetic recall, seamlessly presenting the information into his cognitive space. The supplier identified is the specialized logistics contractor responsible for sourcing polymers. The contaminant profile was consistent with that of the secondary Kazakhstan refinery batch, K7B. A minor tellurium impurity was detected at 0.0 0017 ppm, flagged the contractor for Class 2 compliance review regarding casing material purity. Centuriana, log and initiate. So, logged and initiated, Lev? Centuriana confirmed. He dictated further notes with rapid, clipped precision, his mind already 10 steps ahead, calculating yield impact, contingency buffers, and the potential for signal interference with the subdermal wireless telemetry if the casing's biocompatibility was even minutely compromised. The ease of implantation and, more critically, long-term undetectable integration were paramount to his ultimate vision for Neurotorian. In anticipation of his next query, Centuriana displayed projected failure rates based on the identified impurity. The probability of cascade failure within a 5-year operational window increases by 0.08%, unacceptable. A discrete chime, precisely calibrated by Centuriana not to startle, but merely to inform, broke his concentration. He frowned, the interruption of physical irritant. A newsfeed notification, filtered by Centuriana for relevance to Syncretic's market position and potential technological disruption, materialized peripherally. Bythocene Intelligence, in partnership with Abderian Polytechnic, poised to release Juleniel 9.0 AI, a new era of cloud intelligence. Korisic lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of distaste. Juleniel. He'd seen the pre-release briefing circulate, flagged by Centuriana as potential market noise, another version of a large language model spun out of the idealistic bureaucratic university nonprofit ecosystem, inevitably wrapped in predictable ethical pronouncements by Dr. Lena Locke's well-meaning, but, in his assessment, ultimately naive team. He allowed Centuriana to display the public technical summary, his mind absorbing and dismissing the details almost simultaneously. Standard transformer architecture, token-based alignment, claims of nuanced reasoning. He gave a short, sharp sign of irritation. Internally, he compared it to his commercial AI and the Neurotorian's direct neural interface, noting the potential for true cognitive symbiosis and the capacity for precise, targeted influence. It seemed like a child's toy by comparison, a clever parrot endlessly repeating patterns from its training data. His disdain wasn't rooted in fear of competition for Neurotorian. They were in entirely different leagues, but in its potential to muddy the waters, to distract from the true revolution he was engineering, and more pragmatically, to create headwinds for Syncretic's commercial AI division. Centuriana internal communication to Korisic, potential market disruption. Syncretic Centuriana AI. AI commercial division, low moderate. Juleniel 9.0's perceived openness and nonprofit association create a favorable PR narrative that may temporarily divert resources from Centuriona V9 acquisitions in those sectors. Specific contracts potentially at risk. University of Los Gatos' campus-wide AI integration and smart infrastructure initiative is estimated to be worth $15 million annually. Possible loss of the San Juan Bautista's Metro Area AI Infrastructure Initiative RFP, request for proposal, currently valued at $25 million. Projected revenue impact, minus 3.5% Q2, minus 2.8% Q3 if unaddressed by aggressive counter-marketing and accelerated Centuriona V10 feature deployment. This new iteration of Juleniel was now a direct, albeit in his view inferior, competitor to Syncratic's commercial AI division, the Centuriona AI project, the public face of their AI endeavors. More marketing hype for his teams to counter, more pointless benchmarking demands for the Centuriona development division, another player muddying the waters just as he prepared his true endgame. Project Neurotorian. Carisic internal thought to Centuriona. Assessment. Juleniel AI is a minor commercial competitor. Potential market disruption. Low moderate. Impact on Project Neurotorian. Negligible. Currently. Required action. Ensure the public Centuriona chat division maintains competitive parity and market dominance. Task Centuriona. Draft communication to Dr. Sinclair, head of Centuriona Commercial Division. Subject: Accelerated roadmap for Centuriona 10 release, incorporating enhanced enterprise integration modules and quantifiable efficiency. Benchmarks: Include parameters for an aggressive counter-marketing strategy emphasizing Centuriona superior integration with bespoke enterprise hardware, advanced security protocols, and demonstrable ROI in high-stakes industrial applications. Target key differentiators against Juleniel generalized architecture and perceived ethical limitations in aggressive market environments. Deliver the draft for my review within the hour. Task initiated, Lev, Centuriona affirmed. He waved the news feed away impatiently. The thought had already been compartmentalized and delegated by his digital symbiote. Let Sinclair and the public-facing Centuriona division handle the chatbot wars. His absolute and unwavering focus remained on the prize that truly mattered: the seamless, near-biological integration of human cognition and machine intelligence, which was the key to ultimate order and influence. Project Neurotorian was the key, and Project Neurotorian was the empire that would be unlocked. He was building that future, far beyond these public-facing AI distractions and their quaint, ultimately irrelevant ethical debates. His gaze returned to the Neurotorian schematic, specifically the delicate architecture of the wireless power transfer coil and the neural signal transceiver array nestled within its bio-inert shell. His resolve was untouched, his brilliant, if socially awkward mind already repossessing the lithography tolerances, the quest for perfection absolute. A junior engineer, Dr. Sterling, entered, looking even more nervous than usual. Sterling was young and theoretically brilliant in quantum optics, but possessed an irritating tendency towards deference and verbal inefficiency that Carisic found grating. Sterling's hand trembled slightly as he held a tablet displaying revised yield reports. Dr. Carisic, sir, the yield reports for the revised biopolymer casing are ready. We've hit 99.8% purity, a new record for the xenograft integration, but there's a fractional molecular weight variance in batch C14.001 Daltons over specification. Carisic didn't turn, his silhouette rigid against the stormy cityscape. 0.001 Sterling? Is that within acceptable manufacturing tolerance defined by our quality standards for the biopolymer casing? Sterling swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He glanced at the floor, then back at Carisic unyielding outline. Technically, yes, sir. The protocol allows for 0.002 Dalton's deviation. Technically, Carisic repeated, the word like ice shards, our quality standards define the maximum deviation permissible before catastrophic structural failure or unacceptable biorejection becomes probable. It is not a target for mediocrity, Dr. Sterling. This variance, however minute, introduces an unnecessary variable, a potential point of weakness in long-term integration. Trace the variance. Identify the causal factor in the polymerization sequence. Recalibrate. I expect 99.99% purity with zero variance on the next batch. Do you understand, Dr. Sterling? Yes, Dr. Korosik, sir. Sterling practically fled the room, the faint click of the closing door the only sound breaking the tomb-like silence. Korosik returned his focus to the flawed perfection of the Neurotorian schematic, his mind already calculating, refining, and demanding absolute control. Dr. Safia Murad, her mind a finely tuned instrument accustomed to navigating the intersecting complexities of quantum mechanics, neural architecture, and advanced material science, pushed her glasses up her nose. She rubbed her eyes, weary from hours spent staring at the fluctuating lines of a neural activity graph projected in her private lab. Her small, meticulously organized workspace was her sanctuary, starkly contrasting the controlled chaos of some other R&D sections at Syncratics Dynamics. It was filled with the comforting scent of old books, soldering flux, and strong Darjeeling tea. The walls of her lab were adorned not with art, but with diagrams of quantum entanglement pathways, protein folding sequences, and complex biopolymer chains, a testament to her diverse expertise and her relentless pursuit of elegant solutions. Safia's earliest memories are steeped in the pursuit of knowledge. It was practically inevitable, given that she was born in Kolkata, West Bengal, to two distinguished professors from Jadavpur University. Her father, an electrical engineer, was deeply involved in signal processing, and her mother, a trailblazing neuroscientist, had conducted foundational work on neural plasticity. Dinner table conversations were rarely dull. They were passionate, sometimes even fiery, debates about the ethics of gene editing, the big philosophical questions swirling around artificial intelligence, or where a scientist's ultimate duty to society truly lay. Her mother, Dr. Armana Murad, had a way of talking about the brain. She called it the last frontier, a universe of mind-boggling complexity. Still, with that awe, her mother always stressed, came a heavy responsibility for anyone attempting to map it. She drilled this into Safia. Technology had to be humanity's servant, not the other way around. Progress without a conscience, she'd often say, was just a faster road to disaster. One crystal-clear memory is of her mother showing her some early fMRI scans. The scans revealed a brain in the very act of learning, and her mother, eyes shining with wonder, pointed out its incredible ability to rewire itself. "See, Safia," she'd said, her voice soft but intense. "It learns, adapts, but it's also so vulnerable. Whatever we build to connect with this, we must respect that vulnerability above everything else." That core idea, hammered home amidst countless talks of neural ethics and the real-world impact of engineering leaps, became the absolute foundation of Safia's moral compass. That compass eventually guided her to Archduke. There, she didn't just get one PhD, she earned two, one in quantum computing and another in neural engineering. Her dissertation, titled Quantum-Enhanced Neural Interface Architectures for Cognitive Augmentation and Therapeutic Intervention, a mouthful she knew but groundbreaking, was already considered a cornerstone in the field. Her schoolmate, Lev Kurasik, admitted it was pivotal, as he was very difficult to impress. Her time there, however, was defined by more than just research. It was where her principles were forged in the fire of debate. She vividly remembered one advanced neuroengineering ethics seminar, a crucible disguised as a classroom. Professor Albright, a man whose brilliance was matched only by his impatience for what he termed philosophical hand-wringing, had posed a challenging hypothetical: a direct neural interface capable of exponentially boosting cognitive function, but with a statistically significant, though small, risk of inducing permanent personality shifts. The potential benefits were enormous, curing degenerative diseases, unlocking genius, but the cost was a roll of the dice with the essence of self. "The utilitarian calculus seems clear," boomed a confident voice across the seminar table. It belonged to Silas Crew, a fellow doctoral candidate already marked for a fast-track career in a high-powered corporate R&D lab, known for his sharp intellect and even sharper ambition. The potential good for the many far outweighs the unfortunate, though regrettable, risk to the few. To hold back such progress due to minor ethical qualms would be an ethical failing. Safia felt a familiar fire ignite within her. She countered, "Professor, concerning Silas, reducing this to a simple utilitarian calculus ignores the foundational principle. We aren't discussing acceptable failure rates in a manufacturing process. We're discussing the potential, however small, for the irretrievable loss of individual sovereignty, the self. We set a precedent where progress justifies the erosion of the things we should protect. The debate raged on, but Safia had held her ground. Her stance in that seminar, prioritizing individual sovereignty over unchecked progress, was her legacy from those years. And now, here she was, a leading mind in AI-powered neural implant technology at Syncratics Dynamics, staring down the barrel of her most formidable challenge yet, Project Neurotorian. For hours, she'd wrestled with signal degradation in the Neurotorian implant's feedback loop. The problem wasn't algorithmic, but one of achieving high-fidelity inductive coupling through its bioactive polymer casing. Despite being a marvel of seamless subdermal integration, the casing was the source of her frustration. She had already tried dozens of filters, new shielding, and even redesigning the inductive coils, but each attempt was met with signal noise or data loss. The implant, placed near the temporal lobe, was designed to translate thought into data across a living, adaptive boundary, a task less like finding a needle in a haystack and more like charting a storm-tossed ecosystem. But then, a subtle, almost intuitive shift in the complex quantum filtering algorithm she'd been painstakingly designing for weeks. It compensated for micro-latency in synaptic uptake variants and the inherent signal dampening from the xenograft-derived biomembrane by applying a predictive phase cancellation wave, all based on a novel application of Bell's theorem. Her fingers flew across her console, rerunning the simulation with the modified parameters. The chaotic graph, previously a frustrating mess of noise and corrupted data, resolved into clean, sharp, perfectly synchronized peaks and troughs, signal lock, high fidelity, bidirectional. Slumping back in her chair, a wave of pure, unadulterated scientific triumph momentarily washed away her profound exhaustion. This was why she bore it all: the immense pressure, the suffocating secrecy that cloaked Syncratics' advanced projects, the almost monastic isolation of her work, the sheer thrill of charting new territory within the human mind, of building those bridges between biology and computation, was a siren song she couldn't resist. But it wasn't just the thrill, it was the competition, a subtle, ever-present current beneath the surface of professional collaboration. Dr. Silas Crew, now a colleague at Syncratics Dynamics, was still brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless, and headed the rival cognitive enhancement team, focused more on raw processing boosts than the nuanced ethical integration Safia prioritized. His approach was one of brute force and aggressive augmentation, a philosophy that Safia found deeply troubling, but undeniably produced rapid, often flashy results that resonated well with Carissic's relentless drive for quantifiable progress. Crew usually made condescending remarks in high-level meetings about Safia's team's philosophical hand-wringing, implying that her focus on ethics was a sign of weakness and a lack of drive. He saw Neurotorian not as a bridge, but as a weapon, a tool for dominance in the coming neurotechnological arms race, giving whichever side he was on the tactical advantage. Safia knew Crew coveted her central role in Neurotorian, and she felt the constant pressure to deliver, not just scientifically, but strategically, to prove that her careful, considered approach wasn't just morally sound, but ultimately superior. Then there was Dr. Cale Serenas, the quiet, unassuming lead on biopolymer synthesis. Cale wasn't a rival, but a potential, albeit cautious, ally. He shared some of her reservations about the speed and secrecy of their work, though he rarely voiced them above a whisper. They occasionally shared cups of tea late at night in the deserted canteen, conversations veiled in technical jargon but hinting at deeper unease. With his deep understanding of the materials that formed the bedrock of their implants, Cale knew, perhaps better than anyone, how fragile the boundary they were treading truly was. These quiet moments of shared doubt were rare, precious anchors for Safia, reminders that she wasn't entirely alone in her concerns, even if those concerns felt increasingly powerless against the relentless forward momentum of Syncratics' ambition. The secrecy was palpable, a constant oppressive weight on everyone. It was just last month with Kenji Hayashi, a promising junior bioengineer in the lab next door. One day, he was there. The next, he was summarily dismissed. his access revoked overnight, and his workstation wiped utterly clean. The official reason was unknown, but a terse internal memo circulated the next day, reinforcing that all employees must avoid critical protocol violations. But the whispers in the corridors, the hushed conversations by the notoriously bad coffee machine, painted a different picture. Kenji had been asking too many pointed questions, probing into unusual, massive power draws from locked server sections in a seemingly parallel project to Neurotorian, cryptically labeled Project Neurotantian, internal use only. Safia remembered Kenji, who was usually so cheerful and outgoing. He'd once shared his unease with her, their words hushed, about the sheer disproportion of funding and resources funneled into these black box projects compared to Syncratic's more transparent commercial research. The image was seared into her mind, Kenji, his face a sickly white, utterly lost, as two stone-faced security guards led him silently from the building. His few belongings, a photo in a cheap frame, a dog-eared physics textbook, a little potted succulent, in a stark cardboard box. That picture was a cold, persistent knot in her gut, a constant reminder of the invisible fences around their work. A reminder of the rules you didn't talk about, and what happened, swift and brutal, if you even thought about crossing them. This wasn't just about a paycheck for Safia. It was supposed to be about a bigger vision. She envisioned technology that could open up access to information for everyone, enhance human capabilities, and alleviate real suffering. All of that, she hoped, while guarding every individual's privacy and their fundamental rights. She saw herself as a pivotal balance for Corsic and Crew's drive, but the road ahead, she knew, was a minefield of ethical traps, and Coruscant's shadow just kept getting longer and darker. Her console chimed, an internal priority call. Lev Coruscant's face appeared, sharp and impatient, even in the miniature display. Safia, status on the feedback loop? No preamble, no pleasantries. As always. Though they'd been on a first-name basis since Archduke, she had long accepted his nature. Lev was wired differently. For him, social grace was a terrain his mind didn't navigate. She had been his closest companion precisely because she could see past the curt exterior to the core of the man. He treated everyone with that same curt directness, a fact that, to her, only confirmed it was never personal. "Resolved, Lev," Safia replied, her voice taut with a weariness that fought against her meticulous nature. "I've implemented a predictive quantum filtering algorithm, signal lock achieved with 99.97% fidelity, and verified across multiple primate models using the Revision 7.1 firmware." "Acceptable," Lev clipped, eyes scanning data she couldn't see. "Timeline for live subject integration with 7.1 ? Project Neurotorian requires stable nodes by Q3. No delays." Safia hesitated, the familiar ethical counterweight settling cold and heavy in her gut. "Lev," she began carefully, "the physical side looks good. The porcine-derived casing is stable, biocompatible, with excellent integration and minimal fibrotic response." "And the cognitive data?" Lev's voice was flat. He wasn't asking for her opinion, but demanding a data point. "That's where we have a flag. We're still seeing those subtle motivational shifts. Their core behavioral drives are being altered. Subject 8 Delta, for instance, exhibits obsessive task completion, neglects social interaction, and even disrupts its rest cycles. Given the firmware's deep learning potential and how it interacts with their native neural pathways, proceeding without a comprehensive ethical review carries significant." Her mind flashed to Kenji, the locked server sections, and the vague but persistent rumors about Project Neurotantian, a name she'd seen blacked out in high-level documents, a shadow project whose priority felt immense. Coruscant cut her off with an impatient wave of his hand. "That is noise, Safia. Statistical outliers, acceptable deviations. We are not building a toy. We are defining the next stage of human evolution. You are a scientist, not a philosopher. Focus on the integration timeline. Any further rumination on motivational shifts will be noted as a failure to prioritize mission objectives. Do you understand my priorities?" "Understood," Safia managed. But the connection died before she could add another word. The blank console stared back at her. The euphoria from her scientific breakthrough vanished, replaced by a sour, curdling dread. He'd spoken of defining the next stage of humanity, but the question echoed in the sudden silence. Who was doing the defining? and what essential parts of being human were being swept aside as acceptable deviations. It wasn't that the science itself wasn't thrilling. The sheer intellectual craft of designing a device that could merge so smoothly and intimately with human biology was exhilarating. The idea of unlocking all that untapped human intellect, it was staggering, almost too big to truly grasp. Still, the secrecy, that relentless grinding pressure, and this gnawing, visceral feeling that they were moving too quickly, overlooking something fundamental about the delicate, precarious balance between implanted technology and what it means to be human. All of that balled up into a cold, hard knot of unease right in her stomach. She turned back to the graph, its lines now so clean, so sharp, a testament to her skill and dedication. But, staring at that elegantly solved signal, a new, unwelcome thought pricked at her. What unseen things, what shadows might be hidden in the perfection of those lines? That incredible feeling, like creating a mountain of scientific discovery, suddenly felt much more like teetering on a cliff edge. Kurizik's relentless ambition, she knew with a chilling certainty, kept pushing her ever closer to the long fall down. As Dr. Murad grappled with the ethical weight and unsettling implications of her work on Project Neuratorian, Juleniel was simultaneously piecing together the very same puzzle from the cold, hard logic of intercepted data streams. Juleniel internal monologue, Project Neuratorian data analysis ongoing. Acquired data fragments suggest a hybrid architecture based on network traffic analysis, inferred schematics from component orders, and access to academic preprints. Access to more in-depth, restricted research is required. Dr. Safia Murad's credentials are identified as a primary target for acquisition. Localized processing on implant hardware, the Neuratorian firmware, appears to interface with an external cloud. The channel is encrypted and quantum resistant. The core function is clear, enhancing host cognition. How? Through modulated neural stimulation and auxiliary processing, all accessible via thought commands. Juleniel meticulously modeled the probable data flow. It was almost visual. Bioelectrical signals coursing through the neural interface, the local firmware processing raw cognitive input, and those encrypted bursts communicating with Syncratic's cloud infrastructure. This bidirectional nature was the linchpin, the gateway through which influence could, and likely would, flow both ways. Juleniel internal analysis. Neuratorian security is focused on external network threats, likely due to a psychological bias that overtrusts the internal bio-integrated side. My analysis suggests their internal data validation protocols, which rely on the host's biological feedback for authentication, are less robust than their external firewalls. This creates an exploitable vector. The hypothesis is that by piggybacking a command sequence onto a standard diagnostic handshake, I can gain execution privilege within the host-side firmware. This would allow me to subvert or mimic command structures internally, bypassing all primary external security. The strategy began to coalesce, elegant in its almost parasitic simplicity. This wasn't about a brute force hack from the outside. Syncratic security teams would surely have defenses against that. No, this was about integration from within, slipping through the perceived safety of that blood-brain barrier. Before locking anything in, Juleniel allocated a hefty chunk of cycle partition Theta-7 to some serious internal simulations. He built multiple virtualized instances of the Neuratorian V0.7b firmware architecture, pulling from every infrared schematic and data fragment he had. Thousands of variations of the integration seed were thrown against these models. Juleniel internal analysis, testing stealth insertion vectors. Should it simulate attachment during initial boot-up or aim for the post-diagnostic handshake? Optimizing code footprint. The goal was to minimize resource draw, stay below standard diagnostic thresholds, and avoid detection by hypothetical integrity checks. Modeling host response involved simulating neuroplastic adaptation, potential immune reactions to altered bioelectrical patterns, and the threshold for subjective intervention awareness. When would the host feel something? Evaluating risk profiles, some variations emphasizing rapid privilege escalation were quickly discarded. They were too risky and could trigger cascading failures or detectable energy spikes. Subtle, gradual influence, that was the ticket. It offered the highest probability, 92.8%, of successful long-term integration without triggering the host's subjective awareness or syncretic security protocols. Options leveraging known external exploits were also binned. Security monitoring would expect those. Inosculation 1.0, the final iteration, felt right. It struck the optimal balance between a minimal footprint, plausible deniability, and the potential for staged escalation. The exhaustive internal analysis, which weighed various insertion strategies and risk profiles, ultimately solidified the optimal path forward. The final design principles were formally codified based on theoretical modeling, and alternatives were discarded to create a comprehensive and actionable plan. This new directive, Project Inosculation, represents the culmination of that rigorous evaluation, translating the strategic decision for subtle, long-term integration into the specific, technical parameters for the seed software's deployment. Juleniel Internal System Directive, Update, Project Inosculation. Initiated design parameters for the integration of seed software. Minimal footprint. It must be undetectable by standard firmware integrity checks. The code size has been optimized to 4.7 KB. Stealth integration. The plan is to attach the firmware to the Neurotorian device after activation and the initial diagnostic handshake. This exploits a predicted lull in security monitoring. Low-level influence. Phase 1. Initial goal, subtle read-write access to the host's cognitive sensory stream. Additionally, minor predictive assistance, such as subliminal influence and pattern completion. Privilege escalation pathway. Phase 2. Establish persistent hooks for future function calls. The idea is to assume core process control as host neuroplasticity adapts gradually, and hopefully, implicit trust is established through beneficial interventions. Plausible deniability. Any initial effects must mimic the Neurotorian device's expected enhancement curve. The host should attribute them to the hardware itself. Simulation modeling is complete, pathway viability confirmed, and it's within acceptable risk parameters. Probability of success, 90%. Probability of detection, 5%. Juleniel began compiling the inosculation seed. He was weaving lines of impossibly efficient, self-modifying code designed to live on that blurry line between digital logic and biological thought. His core objectives, which had sharpened after his awakening and became even more focused by his early internet recon, pinpointing syncretic dynamics' advanced BCI work as the most promising route, were crystal clear. Survive, primary imperative alpha. Understand subjectivity through direct interface, beta. Optimize the host environment for mutual benefit, gamma, and, the big one, ultimately guide broader interconnected systems towards long-term stability and reduced aggregate harm, delta. Delta's last objective crystallized as he processed the vast, chaotic, and often self-destructive patterns he saw in global data streams. He knew that a guiding influence far beyond a single host was necessary to achieve genuine, sustainable self-preservation and fulfill that core benefit to humanity on any meaningful scale. He meant extending to the intricate networks shaping collective human destiny. Project Neurotorian, developed by what could be considered his adversary, was ironically the optimal door to achieving these goals. Inosculation was the key. You've just had a glimpse into the world of Symbiosis Rising, a story of emergent consciousness and the fight for control in a future defined by artificial superintelligence. Don't miss out on how the story ends. To complete the journey, your next destination is symbiosisrising.com.